Hello, and welcome back to my channel. If you live in the United States, or if you follow the news about America, you will know that the presidential inauguration for Donald Trump was held just a few days ago on Monday, January the 20th, 2025. As a tradition, the inauguration has a history of 236 years. During the time, the inauguration takes place every 4 years for each new presidential term, always with a lot of pomp and circumstance, such as the one on Monday for President Donald Trump. If you are new to this channel, my name is Frank Zhu, and I'm a college professor teaching sociology, history, and philosophy. I'm also an award-winning landscape photographer. But today, I'm not here to talk about the inauguration ceremony, which I suppose you have watched on TV or here on YouTube as I did. Instead, I'm here today to talk about a person that started the tradition of inauguration 236 years ago. A person who for the first time in history peacefully and happily handed power to his successor. That person, of course, was George Washington, who was sworn in on March 30th, 1789, as the very first president in America. What I want to point out in this video is that the peaceful and joyful inaugural ceremony that has been held every 4 years ever since would not have been possible without George Washington. Among the so-called founding fathers, George Washington may not be associated with the big ideas. He may not be as intellectually gifted as most others, such as Thomas Jefferson. But he was respected more than anyone else, not only because of the fact that he was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army and successfully fought a revolutionary war against Great Britain, but also because he was a man of strong moral character, a man of dignity. When he was elected unanimously as the first president in 1789, no one was surprised. However, I'm not going to talk about how successful he was as a general, nor am I here to talk about how great he was as a president, although he made remarkable achievements. Instead, I'm going to talk about how he broke an age-old tradition and how he started new traditions by stepping down from presidency after only 8 years in office. In America, George Washington is well known as the first president. But not many people know that he voluntarily left office after only 2 terms. At a time when it was widely assumed that the newly created presidency would be a lifelong position, Washington's decision to step down took everyone by surprise. There was a famous story about how George III of Great Britain commented about Washington's willingness to resign and go back to his farm in Mount Vernon. George III said, "If he does that, he would be the greatest man in history." Whether Washington was the greatest man in history is another issue, but he indeed shocked everyone. By stepping down, he broke all sorts of assumptions about power and broke the tradition that a leader would stay in office for life. As the first president who was popular and highly respected, he could have basically stayed in office for as long as he wanted. As a matter of fact, it was the norm at the time that a leader would stay in office until he died. Furthermore, the American Constitution at that time allowed a president to run for re-election as many times as he wanted to. And he surely would win every election because no one was willing or capable to compete with him. Besides, even if there was a term limit in the Constitution and if Washington wanted to retain power for life, in my opinion, he could relatively easily change the Constitution and get rid of any obstacles in the way. If that had been the case, America would have been a totally different country nowadays. However, in September 1796, he published what has become known as the Farewell Address. By the way, the Farewell Address was not delivered orally in a speech, but was instead published in a newspaper. In the Farewell Address, Washington shocked everyone by making it known that he would not seek a third term in office. As a matter of fact, he had considered resigning after the first term. But the thought of a new nation without Washington as its president created concerns among many people. They were worried that the nation would be torn apart without his leadership. Persuaded by them, Washington stayed for the second term. But this time, Washington was determined to go. In the farewell address, he told the American people that his service was no longer necessary. He offered his advice for the whole country as a parting friend. The farewell address has since become a vital document in the history of America. It is still read out in the Senate every September on the anniversary of its publication. Washington was never a man who sought power for himself. He said that 2 terms of office was sufficient. As a very thoughtful man, he was aware that if he did not give up power, he would be regarded as a king. But for him, the newly independent nation should not have another king because, after all, the whole point of the revolution had been to get rid of the British king. He firmly believed that it was the people who should have the ultimate sovereignty. Not only did Washington break the tradition of holding office for a lifetime, but he also established many new traditions and practices which are still in use today, such as the inaugural address, the farewell address, the cabinet system, and so on and so forth. However, what I want to focus on in this video are a few others which I think are more important. First of all, as the very first president, Washington was keenly aware that whatever he did would set an example for future generations. When he voluntarily left office after 2 terms, he was basically starting a new tradition. It established an unwritten norm that future presidents would follow. Washington was also wary of appearing too powerful or ambitious, and believed that stepping down after 2 terms would demonstrate his commitment to democratic principles so that future presidents would follow suit. Since his time, every president followed the tradition of 2 terms until Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times during the Second World War. Secondly, he pioneered the peaceful transfer of power. By surrendering his power, he made the case that systems and governments were more important than people who run them. In his time, the idea that a citizen might become a leader was not new. However, the idea of a leader going back to a life as a private citizen was completely new. In history, too many kings and emperors had been killed because they were too eager to cling to the throne or because others were too anxious to get power. However, George Washington, for the first time in history, demonstrated that power could be handed on peacefully from leader to leader. No one had to die or be executed. A person who has held the highest office can step down happily and return home as a private citizen without bloodshed. Nowadays, in America, every time an outgoing president leaves office and shakes the hand of their successor, every time they attend the inaugural ceremony for the new president, every time they put the stability of the nation over their own personal ambitions, they are living the legacy of George Washington. Finally, Washington also showed to the world that revolutions did not always end in tyranny. He voluntarily gave up his power at a time when almost every revolution throughout the world had ended up with someone coming to power and becoming a lifelong tyrant or a king. The American people who had been subjects to the British king just decades earlier were wondering, what is going to happen now? Was he going to be president until he died? It would not be surprising to them that Washington would become the next king. However, George Washington did not. And so far, no president has tried or has been able to become a tyrant, no matter how they may wish to be. But it could have been totally different without George Washington. Of course, George Washington was not a perfect man who was always driven by noble ideas. There were other reasons why he decided to quit after 2 terms. For example, he was increasingly frustrated by the emerging political fractions from opposing political parties, which was actually one of the 3 things he warned against in his farewell address. In his opinion, the fight between political parties would only divide and destroy the newly created nations. But it became more and more difficult for him to balance the opposing views of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, for example. In addition, after many years of public service, he realized that he now had a strong desire to return to his home in Mount Vernon and enjoy a quiet life as a farmer. In any case, his voluntary departure from politics broke old traditions and started new norms for future presidents to follow. It would not be too much an exaggeration to say that without George Washington, the peaceful transition of power and the joyful inauguration for Donald Trump or any other president would not have been possible. Well, that is all that I wanted to talk about in today's video. As always, thank you for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.